Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Pat McDowell, and committed to bringing you ideas and resources that will help you build your professional development plan. Now, whether you're tuning in for the first time or are a regular listener, glad to have you. If you want to be a nonprofit leader, or maybe just more effective in the role you're in now, you're in the right place. I'm glad to bring you these weekly conversations with nonprofit leaders who are on the cutting edge of our sector. And if you would, do me a favor, find the share button. Usually it's at the top of the episode graphic with 3 dots on the device you're holding right now. Share this episode with one other person so that we can continue to build a global community focused on nonprofit leadership. Well, I had another fantastic conversation in this episode with Curt Langford, who leads one of the most dynamic university alumni associations in the United States, which is at Texas Tech University. And what will make this conversation so valuable for you is that Curt has some really good ideas about building an organizational culture and how you better connect and engage your most important constituents. Now, for Curt, it, of course, is the Red Raider Nation. But for you, it might be your staff, might be your board, or perhaps your most important donors. Curt and I also talk about blending the talents of your introverted colleagues with your extroverted colleagues. How do you build on the talents and skills both sides of that equation bring? And we also get into the board dynamic. What do you do with board members who want to sometimes get into the weeds and really micromanage without discouraging their engagement at all? Lots of great takeaways for you to consider, and don't forget to check out the show notes. This is episode number 144. Just go to the podcast or the news page at patmcdowell.com, and you'll find all of the resources and ideas that Curt and I discussed, as well as more information on the great work he and his team are doing at Texas Tech University. Speaking of resources, while you're on our website, make sure you connect with us. We're on all of the primary social media platforms, including YouTube. Check out our new YouTube channel, as well as you can get on our email list and make sure you don't miss any of our weekly resource emails that come out to include episodes just like this one. And by the way, if you want to connect with us, we'd be happy to schedule a call or a Zoom to talk about your organization and its board development, its strategic planning, or maybe we can talk about your career journey and how we could help you perhaps with one of our unique mastermind programs. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Curt Langford. Hey, Curt, thanks for joining me on The Path.
Patton, thank you. Appreciate the invitation to take part in this.
I'm excited about this conversation, Curt. You've had a fantastic leadership journey, primarily in higher education, but the things you and I are going to talk about, I know will apply to nonprofit leaders of every sector. We're going to talk about building a culture. We're going to talk about telling our story more effectively, and so many of the issues that help nonprofit leaders be more effective in their role. In fact, as you think about your network, and I know you have a significant network nationally, Curt, in the higher education and alumni space, what do you think is the biggest challenge many of them are facing right now?
Pat, let me first of all say at the outset here, before I forget, here at Texas Tech, we're all about the double T. So let me just say, anybody with a double T in their name is good in my book. So that's
glad I qualified.
Sorry here, but that's something I always am jealous of, people that have a double T in their name. No, among my colleagues, and this is interesting, as I've kind of re-entered into this profession, having been in here in a prior life, I've got a lot of colleagues, those that have been doing this for a long time, as well as some of those that are newer in the industry. And there's different perspectives on the challenges that we're facing. And I kind of want to have this conversation, obviously, without reference to some of the COVID challenges that we faced, but pulling the lens beyond that, really just the challenges of developing a stronger appreciation for higher education in general. I think the value of higher education is declining somewhat in our country, and that's concerning. A lot of folks that don't maybe understand the history of higher ed and the role that it's played in the development of this great nation. I think to a great extent, higher education in general is suffering especially with state funding being minimized so much for state-supported institutions, that puts more pressure on organizations like ours, an alumni association, to help fill the gap for funding, much-needed funding to keep the tradition of higher education alive. And there are some fair criticisms, I believe, among my colleagues as well as many of our alumni, just not those of our institution, but a lot of schools, as to attitudes and feelings towards the cost of higher education, the value, what's received, how necessary is it. And I'm afraid that one of the challenges or the concerns that I have, and I know many of my colleagues share this, is, at what point does the pendulum start swinging back when you start suffering some of the consequences of not having a well-educated society? And if you've done any study of higher ed, and when the early years of this country, when the importance of what it means to have a society that is well educated and how it makes it a more sympathetic society, a more tolerable society, whatever the case may be, it's a better society. But I think that's a challenge, and that's a discussion that on our Zooms and our recent meetings, that's a concern that we see. It's a flag of concern that, hey, people are becoming a little bit more critical, not a little bit, a lot more critical of higher ed in general, maybe critical of viewpoints, critical of some of the ideas that are happening on college campuses. And certainly I'm not in agreement with all of those ideas, but that's the idea of the university marketplace, right? It's the competition of ideas. But a lot of people feel like maybe not all of the ideas are getting a fair play. And there's some valid concern and criticism there. But and in my profession and among my colleagues, we're all kind of along the continuum. But I think we would all be in agreement that we're better off as an educated society, and that's the role higher education plays. And that's one of the things we want to keep that, as opposed to abandoning it altogether, because I don't think we'd be very comfortable with the alternative.
Such a good point, Curt, and I'm appreciative of your thoughtful consideration of the challenge. Having spent 10 years in higher education myself, I'm certainly familiar with some of the arguments and the challenges to the whole system and the funding for it. And it leads, of course, to something we're going to talk about in this conversation, the increasing importance of telling your story, making your case. Yeah. And of course, you do such a beautiful job of not just the education that the Texas Tech community gets during their time on campus, but of course, you represent the lifelong connections for Red Raider Nation. And that's something we'll talk about, because every organization, I think, is looking for better connectivity. And how do we maintain that? And of course, before I forget, Curt, I want to congratulate you as we release this episode. Texas Tech and the Alumni Association in particular is celebrating its 99th anniversary, or birthday, if you will. As you think about a centennial anniversary a year from now, we'll talk about that. But maybe that's a good segue to why did you get back into the role of alumni leadership now that you're the president and CEO of the Texas Tech Alumni Association? How did your journey lead you back to Red Raider Nation?
Well, yeah, thanks, Pat. It's somewhat of a homecoming for me. I'm the son of a professor, a longtime English professor and dean of the graduate school here at the university. So I grew up very close to my alma mater, and I understand it from a childhood perspective as well as into my adult life. Married my wife, Jill. She and I graduated together. Both of our kids have graduated or attending the university. So very, very closely tied into my own school here. But I think it was my senior year, I was studying public relations and I minored in marketing. And my last semester at Tech, I took a job with the Ex-Students Association. That's what the Alumni Association was called at the time, writing stories for the Alumni magazine. And it was just a kind of a student part-time job, but that was my entree into the field of alumni relations. And of course, I fell in love with it. From the get-go, the people that I worked with here, the training that I received here, but then the whole idea of telling stories in alumni publication, that's one of the things that our publication, the Texas Texan magazine, publication that dates back to 1950, prides itself on telling the stories of our grads. And that's kind of how I cut my teeth. That's the cloth I'm cut from.
Sure.
Within this office, and writing for the publication, and thought I was going to take a job elsewhere when I graduated, but the longtime director here called me in and asked if I'd be interested in coming on full time, and that was exciting. The only thing I wasn't expecting that. I asked him, "Does that include a parking spot on campus?" And he said, "Yes." I'm all in.
That's all you needed, right?
That was highly coveted, and that began an 11-year relationship here at the Alumni Association, doing all kinds of things, especially at an exciting time. This was the advent of desktop publishing. I was a big Macintosh fan, understood some of the software, so that kind of led me into helping to bring the magazine in-house as we started to do the publishing in-house as well as doing some of the writing. Worked with our student group. This was the advent of the internet as well. So I can speak back to the days of Netscape and CompuServe and Prophecy and some of the things that we did in the early years of the internet. And I kind of began here, and then, due to the course of things that happened, I had an opportunity to enter into the private sector, which was wonderful because although I left my alumni job here, I did not leave the alumni profession. What I was doing in the private sector was working with alumni offices all over the country before the opportunity to come back home in the capacity that I'm in now, which I've been doing for 3 years. So I was in the private sector for 18 years. I worked here for 11, private sector for 18, and now I'm back here at home for the last 3. And it's been wonderful coming back.
It's fantastic. And as an English major, I can appreciate the communication skills you developed early on as a writer. And certainly that speaks to your passion for telling stories, which we'll talk about. But I guess as you came back into the present CEO role, I know you were very attuned to establishing the right kind of culture. And I wonder if you could talk about what does it mean to have a positive staff culture. We'll start with staff, but we can maybe talk about the external audiences too. But first, how did you approach staff culture when you arrived?
Well, it was quite different. And one of the things I wanted to do is something that we had done rather successfully in the business market, in the corporate world, culture-wise, with our clientele and obviously with our internal culture within the company to help us develop even stronger alliances and partnerships with the schools that we worked with. The whole idea of having agreements and relationships as opposed to contracts. A lot of this is in the nuance in language even. And coming back to the alumni office and working with some people that I'd worked with many years before, as well as some of the newcomers that had come on since I'd been gone. I wanted to kind of rattle the cage a little bit gently and kind of shake things up. And we did an off-site retreat. That's something that they had never done here. And said, listen, we're going to go. And there's a place in Turkey, Texas, way up in the Panhandle called the Hotel Turkey. It's an old, rustic, neat place. It's one of the favorite places I like to go to get away and think. And for Bob Wills. Bob Wills used to stay there back in the early Bob Wills and the Texas Playboy days. And they still host Bob Wills Day up there. But Hotel Turkey was a neat place. I called the managers up there, they're tech alumni, and I said, hey, can we utilize your place for an all-day workshop, staff retreat? Which we did that, and that was new. That was a new experience for our team, right? Some of the old-timers as well as some of the new ones. And so we're going to get away from the completely in a different setting. And I wanted to take them through this why exercise. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek's Start With Why. We had a lot of success utilizing his material that stems back from that early TED Talk that he did so many years ago. But the message still resonates today. He has such a strong following. But this idea of developing a why culture among our team, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And we had, I've always kind of been looking at that in the corporate world as it relates to customers, but in our world, alumni are our customers, so to speak. And what is the why? But looking at that internally first from a staff retreat perspective, I wanted to have a better understanding of the team and the people that I was going to be working with. And starting from the inside out, so to speak, I wanted to understand everybody's personal why. Yeah. Because your personal why has a lot to do with an organizational why. And how do your personal whys align with the why of the organization? Now, I could sit here and speak purpose, mission, vision, value, proposition, all that, which is, obviously well documented and everything. But what those words state really is a why that's hard to articulate. That's something that must be felt. It's more of an emotional proposition. Right. And you either believe in it or you don't. And I ask the people that I work with, tell me your why, the why of what you do every day at work. And is it about just the paycheck, or is this something that you believe in?
Yes.
And if I can help people to understand or have a better alignment in what they do every day, even some of the grunt jobs that we do, it all helps to fill the why. But if we are properly aligned internally, my belief is that it makes us more compelling to the audience or our tribe that we're trying to communicate with. And if people feel compelled to be a part of that, well, they're believing in our why, not our what. The what's and the hows are important, don't get me wrong. And there's plenty of people in the organization here at the office that remind me of the what's and hows all the time. But that 30,000 foot view, that's the why. And we're either authentic in what we do or we're faking it. And that was one of the first goals I wanted to do in the retreat, is to really, again, kind of rattle the cage a little bit and say, hey, do you believe in what you're doing every day? And that's been a journey, 3 years, and it's been good. But it's one thing to have that conversation. It's another thing to live it. I must live the why every day. And that's a challenge. It's a daily test for me. But I'm trying to model that behavior for everybody.
Well, it's a good one.
So that,
yeah, it's a good one. And Curt, I wonder, as the leader facilitating that retreat, I guess what you're doing is both encouraging the individual whys. In other words, it's okay to have different motivations, but then ultimately at the end of the day, you're trying to find, I guess, common threads that tie everyone together. Or how, again, thinking about a leader facilitating the kind of conversation you did, was that your overall kind of objective?
Yes. Number one, the big part of it's conversation. I don't think anybody ever has asked that question before. Do we have a genuine interest in each other's why? And the lesson for me, and where it's educational to me, is that develop a better appreciation for who the people are, their backgrounds, where they come from. We obviously don't have the same story, but we're working in the same building on the same campus and supposedly for the same cause. So I think this is one of the things that helps us to develop a better trust with one another. And we're not there yet. But I do think at least we've got a roadmap. And I've taken the purpose, mission, vision, and value proposition that was already established here, and I'm trying to recast that as our why. So that's also consistent, not just with the team, but also our national board members, to try to reiterate that message. And as we have new board members coming in, it's important that we're consistent with that message, developing an ongoing appreciation for what we're doing. That's a story that we can't tell enough, because if you don't tell it, people forget it. Tradition, if you look up tradition in the dictionary, I was kind of fascinated by this. I thought it was going to be this real elaborate conceptual type, but tradition is nothing more than telling a story from one generation to the next. And that's how tradition survives, because you're telling the story. If you don't, we lose the tradition.
And every organization needs that, right, Curt? And we can't assume, because we live it on a daily basis, that all of our even internal communities fully understand that tradition. And so I just love the fact that you're kind of emphasizing that, and you're making it part of your literally daily routine. But let me ask you this, Curt, because you, I think, would be a self-described extrovert. And many of our dynamic leaders who like to cast the vision are in fact that. But we also have, and you have, talented colleagues who are introverted. So how do you blend the extroverts with the introverts?
Well, and that, again, as I alluded to earlier, one of the lessons for me is really developing a full appreciation for what they all bring to the table. As I think about it, while there's a part of me that wishes everybody could be as social and glad-handing and interactive as I am, oh my gosh, what a horrible world if we were all that way. When I'm really honest with myself, it would be like, no, we need those other personalities as well for the things that they bring to the table. And while I'm in a role which many would think is more apt for extroverts, I've been doing some recent reading where some of the most effective CEOs out there are introverts. And it's interesting because there are different leadership qualities you bring to the table and how you best leverage them. for the alignment of the organization, whoever it is you represent. So there's several individuals within the office that, we don't exchange a lot of words, but I have a deep appreciation for what they bring and what they do. And there's a sense of fulfillment in their work and what they do. I can't understand that. I'm like, how can you behave that way? But they're wired differently. They love
That's okay.
Right. So rather than trying to be all like me, thank goodness they're not, trying to develop a better appreciation. And that's one of the things that's been a challenge for me, is really taking that comprehensive look and doing a deep dive with everyone to understand it. And when you understand their why, if you understand them from their story, their perspective, then that helps to build the trust. And even though our personalities may not be the same, there's a mutual appreciation and respect.
And good for you for lifting up the gifts that differ, and the wiring that we all have is different, but it's still equally valuable. And of course, it reminds me of, I think you and I talked about a great book by Susan Cain, Quiet, which in fact lifts up, as you just did, the power and the ability of introverts to be very effective leaders. And good for you as a leader, frankly, to lift up both of those characteristics, extroverts and introverts.
Well, and I lean also to my upbringing in the church, and as a Christian, I can't help but refer to Romans, the teaching about the different gifts that people have and how it relates to a church. So those lessons are there, and it was written long before any modern authors as to the different skill sets that people bring to the world, and how everybody is needed to play a different role.
Such a good point. We can lift up the classic texts as well as the more recent ones, but your point remains very valid, as it has been. Something else, you have been really effective, Curt, in terms of creating community. Obviously, an alumni association, by its very nature, wants people to join. However, you have a distinction I think it's worth lifting up. And every nonprofit, of course, wants people to, quote, join. But you would say maybe there's a difference between joining and belonging. So talk about what you mean and the distinction between those two words as it relates to kind of creating engagement and community.
So again, it's nuance, right? So I don't know if it was at that retreat, but at some point in one of our meetings, I think it was with my marketing team. And again, I have a marketing background, but I was looking at them and they were talking about, on our brochures and our website, it's about join today, join, it's all this authoritative, do this now. But I just said one time, join to me is a 4-letter word. And they kind of looked at me strange. And I was like, well, it's so transactional. And as I've read Simon Sinek stuff and some of these other things, Seth Godin, all marketers tell stories. When you get into the text and you begin to understand some of the nuance, belong, when I said, why can't we say belong today or belong? It's almost something that states something bigger than ourselves. The idea of belonging to something, belonging to a cause, as opposed to joining something. And I may be making too much of that,
right?
But join is transactional. And that's what we're trying to get away from. Join is like a what or a how. It's like, somebody says, well, how do I be a member? Well, you can join online, or you can download our app. But, somebody comes up and says, how do I belong? How do I belong to your cause? That's a different conversation. I think that's a deeper conversation. And it's the kind of conversation that I think helps with retention, in the sense that that's not just a one-year transaction, but something that we're going to be more likely to get them to renew year over year, because they believe in what we're doing. And, believe and belong fit together pretty well. So, and I had a little fun with this one time in a column. I talked about the 3 B's in life. I was thinking about believe, because I was inspired by that a lot from Simon Sinek's writing. And then the belong, that's a language that we're trying to incorporate. Believe, belong. Well, what's the response to that? And that's the 3rd B, behave. So believe, belong, behave. And I think if we do things consistently and create that compelling conversation, that compelling cause that resonates with a larger audience, people will begin to behave in the right way. And you want to have that conversation in such a way when you're telling the stories and the things that you're achieving because of your memberships, people are inspired by that. And then what you want to hear is that sweet spot. You're in the why when somebody says, that is so neat. How can I belong to the organization and help?
Right.
That's that's a deeper relationship that I think is less manipulative and more inspirational.
So well put, Curt. Love that. In fact, I applaud what you did, whether it was a formal audit, if you will, but I'm wondering if every nonprofit leader listening should do what you just did. You started going through the material and you noticed the transactional language. And I wonder if a lot of our nonprofit friends listening anywhere might have the same thing. I know I was guilty as a fundraiser, Curt, of using transactional language at times and wondering why the relationship building wasn't occurring. And I'm guessing you've seen positive results as a result of this kind of transformation of language.
Well, I would like to think, and we haven't completely abandoned it, right? I mean, we still have some of that language, but that's part of the culture change. That's where I'm wanting to get, because I'm also not a person of mandates. It's even a conversation with my own team, trying to bring people along into the nuance in the new world. But yeah, overall, we've experienced some growth despite the challenges. Now, my first year on the job, we had a team that went to the Final Four for the first time. It's pretty exciting. We're playing the championship game, baseball team in Omaha, playing for the World Series. A lot of exciting things going on. So got some wind in our sails right off the bat. But then this little thing like COVID happened, and we had to batten down the hatches. But when you look over the last 3 years, considering everything that we've been through, yes, today, and as several of my board members have said recently from our recent board member meeting, we are in a strong position today as we've ever been. And considering everything we've been through, that's a testament to our people and to our people that belong, to our people that believe. And that's a message that I try to get out there and say thank you because of you. But I think it speaks to the authenticity and the relevance of who we are. I believe our message survived the storm. And our membership is beginning to trend back upwards again. It waned a little. Decisions that were made somewhat based on our membership levels, some things that we did to put us in better shape for that short-term financial concern. But so glad that we did it now, because it put us on a better footing. And but now I think the message, as more and more people start to respond and exponentially advocate for us, I think it enhances our credibility and strengthens our message and expands our reach and relevance, if you will.
Good for you. Good for your board for recognizing that, because that, in fact, is something I want to ask you about. Nearly every nonprofit leader listening has a board that they are engaged with or interacting with. How have you brought this culture conversation to them? And have you seen kind of more engagement from your board, or what is your approach to board development?
First of all, I've got 30 board members, so that's a lot of dances. And I may have known 2 or 3 dances coming in. I've had to take a lot of dance lessons when you have that many personalities, but I value all of them. Again, introverts, extroverts, people of all walks of life, different backgrounds, different ages. But it's a challenge. It's a lot of conversations. I embrace them all. And again, what it is we all have in common is love for our alma mater and what we're wanting to do. There's different people that see different paths to where we need to go. And I think sometimes I find myself as kind of being a liaison between 2 different opinions.
Right.
Mediate times. We've got the finance side of the aisle. We've got the membership side of the aisle. So sometimes I find myself caught in a debate between the House and the Senate. Use that correlation.
Right.
But that's a skill set, right? Understanding and hearing both sides of those. And it's like, okay, both sides of those concerns. The idea of elevating our membership level, for instance, what I alluded to earlier. We need to increase our minimum membership level to belong to the association, to help put us in a better financial footing, versus those that want to expand membership. Let's do it through volume. If we can get more members, well, we can increase our membership, and that's going to give us an immediate gain. Which, so that was a conversation and somewhat of a debate, and we found a compromise in between that I think played very, very well. And then we went into COVID, and I'm so glad that we did what we did, because it did put us in a better footing. But you can't overreact. That pendulum can't swing too far one way or the other. Otherwise, the overcorrections become a big cloud of confusion. And I think the more you can stay behind and keep the conversation central and centric, that's how you push this train forward. And maybe the train's not going as fast as some would go, but when the train's going across the curve, you're not losing as many people on the train. And I'm a slow and steady wins the race kind of a guy. And as long as we're on the way to the next station, we're good.
Well, and I love the way you say that. And your analogy of the House and the Senate is a funny one, but appropriate, I think, because, and I'm curious how you balance that, because I think you and I've talked about board members often come in with a self-expectation that my job is to almost micromanage the numbers. And I'm going to look at your numbers, Curt, month to month, and I have to see progress. But you're in a long-term relationship game. So have you found things that have helped you reorient board members so they're not obsessed with the monthly report and better understand maybe your long-term vision?
I think one of the goals there, and that is definitely a challenge. And number one, you can't get overly emotional about it. And one of the things I guard against is getting defensive, but really trying to have the conversation and bringing context and helping them to understand this. Because again, I've got a long-term vision. When I came, I was, when I applied for this position, I gave a 15-year vision. Well, our board terms are 3 or 6 years at best. So there is some concern about letting short-term people make long-term decisions, right? But that's more kind of the corporate speak. In this case, our boards are family, and even though they may or may not be on the board, they have a love for the organization, and they still affiliate with the organization even after they fulfilled their service on the board. So the key is conversation and asking questions. I've often noticed that sometimes if you can ask the strategic questions to help them to maybe see another perspective on their own terms, it helps them to maybe understand, to be a little bit more sensitive or a little bit more tolerant of another way of thinking, right? But that's not to say that they're, if it's as you say, somebody that's coming in and micromanaging, it's not that that's not important.
Right.
We just came off a year through COVID where I'm glad we had some micromanaging of our finances taking place, because they bring tremendous expertise and skill that helped us to be better with our budgeting processes and how we look at our monthly financials, that today we're in a much better position than we would have been if not for some of that micromanaging. So it's a balance, but while we're concerned and we do what we need to do to make sure that this quarter's report is good, I'm also reminding where I want our annual reports to look like, what I want our annual reports to look like 3 and 5 years from now. And sometimes you can make a decision that looks good for the quarterly report, but it's going to have some damage to you long term. And that's about broadening the base versus broadening the base of our supporters tomorrow's giving.
Right.
Versus just focusing on those people who can give a lot today. And the good news is with 30 board members, you have people in all camps, and it kind of forces us all to kind of find the common ground. And I think that's where we tend to move the needle the most.
Yeah, I love that, Curt, and how once again you lift up the gifts of all your board members, and rather than kind of have an expectation that we all need to be exactly alike, you're saying, there is some value in having differing opinions. In fact, it's likely made your association even stronger. And I can't help but ask you you want to elaborate on that further?
No, I was saying, if you don't have that, you could very easily be driven by one board member, and there's really no point to have all
the loudest voice in the room, right?
Right. And but that's the goal. I think the key is conversations and asking the right questions, and just helping to provide perspective.
Well, Curt, I can't help but circle back to your 15-year plan comment. I fancy myself as a personal strategic planner. Love that. And I know a lot of people here early in the new year of 2022 are probably looking at annual plans. But let me ask you again, you came into this job with a 15-year plan. Have you always been kind of a 15-year ahead guy throughout your career? Or talk about maybe the logic there.
probably not. I think that may be somewhat of an overcorrect, actually, coming out of the corporate world, where I went through 3 CEOs that were very, very concerned about their quarterly reports all the time.
Right,
and,
right.
And that's kind of, and yet what we were doing in the business, I'm trying to help them to understand. I said, yeah, but look how much better off we are over the last 5 or 6 years. You're only as good as your last quarterly statement, right? A lot of people say, but if you could pull that lens back and look at trend lines, one of the ways I remember sitting down with my former CEO and I said, I'm more of a mutual fund guy than a stock guy.
Interesting.
I believe that, take the long-term results. It might mean that we have some down quarters, but if you'll trust it over the long term, you're going to be better off and you're not going to have some of the severe drop-offs. And that's kind of some might argue that's kind of a conservative approach. So coming into this environment, part of it had to do with my age. I'm adding up how many years before would be approximate retirement age. And that's kind of what I was looking at, 15-year period. And I believe, and I love this so much, this is where I want to end it. And I want to leave it better than I found it, because the individual that I say I'm filling in for, you don't replace my predecessor here was here for 40 years. So that's rather daunting and intimidating, coming into a place for 40 years, who was so well thought of, not just on this campus, but within the profession nationally. And still visit with him. I ran into him this morning, in fact, and had a nice visit. But to give 15 years, I can't give 40 years. I'm not going to last that long.
Right.
If I give 15 years, that's one of the conversations I'm helping some of my short-termers to understand and say, look, I want to do this because this is where we want to be 10 years down the road. You may not be on the board at that time, but this is where I want to get. But, I hear West Texas, we don't have a lot of trees. It's the flat plains of West Texas. But where we do have shade in the summer, these are the people that planted the trees way back in the day. And I'm so grateful for them. And a lot of the trees that we're planting today and the trees that we benefit from today, it's some of the long-term thinkers from yesterday. But I want to keep watering those trees so that we have shade in the next decade for the organization that we're trying to do.
It's beautiful. And I'm, of course, not surprised that you're very effective at telling stories. Of course, you have been throughout your career. And of course, that's among the chief advice I'm taking away if I'm a listener, a nonprofit leader. In fact, let me kind of close with that topic. I got a couple questions here, but Curt, I think listeners nodding their heads saying, yeah, I need to tell better stories. But do you literally collect, in other words, you keep a file of the stories from the Red Raider Nation so that you're more effective in telling stories? Or what are some of the things you do to be a better storyteller?
Well, that's good. First of all, if you're familiar with Seth Godin and All Marketers, I'm glad he re-released his book, From All Marketers Are Liars to All Marketers Tell Stories.
Right. Sounds better, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, and it is marketing. Everybody's selling something, right? But if you're selling something that makes us all better off, that's true. Everybody's selling something, but everybody's buying something too. And it's a matter of, marketing is where there's a need, and there is a need. There is a psychological, emotional need to belong. And that's what we're trying to do, is to connect people, to help them realize that we can help meet a need that maybe they don't realize that they have. And storytelling helps to make that connection. Seth Godin, he would tell you what's one of the things he says. He says, ignore the ones who don't matter, focus on the ones who do. Well, on first glance, that sounds kind of crass, but
yeah, right.
When he focus on the ones who do, these are the ones that are going to respond to your message. These are the ones that are responding to the story. And if you can do that effectively, then they become ambassadors for you, and you're growing from the inside out, or from within the why. So I'm merging Simon Sinek and Seth Godin's theology together there. Now, Donald Miller, big fan of Donald Miller as well, story brand.
Yep.
And what he would say, and one of the things that we're trying to do here at the association, I've got stenciled on my wall here, every Red Raider has a story. And I mentioned earlier about the Texan tells the stories of our alums. Well, Donald Miller goes into it a little bit more in story brand. he often, and on his podcast, he often talks about helping the customer to be the hero in their own story. Well, in our case, the customers are the alumni, right? So, for example, we have a Legacy U program that we launched this last summer. We've had a legacy program for the longest time where alumni can sponsor a child or a grandchild, and they receive a birthday and some Texas Tech items throughout the year, and help kind of cultivate that loyalty and breed the next generation of Red Raiders. But we integrated the Legacy U, which was a 2.5-day experience last summer where grandparents were able to host their grandkids on campus. Parents weren't allowed for a combined interactive, educational, athletic, just a very, very comprehensive experience on campus. And one of the, Pat, one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen is some of these grandparents walking hand in hand with their grandkids, 7,
Wow.
8, 9 years on the campus of their alma mater, telling the stories of when they went to school here. And when you get the parents out of the picture, that's a rich experience as well, right? But what
Right.
we were literally doing with Legacy U, and there's some other examples, other schools have done this successfully, and that's why we wanted to do it, because it's a very wifeful programming, experiential thing that's helping us to be more relevant, but to our audience. But we're helping those alums, those older alumni to be a hero in their own story within their own family legacies. So that's a literal explanation of what Donald talks about in Story Brand.
Love
and if
that.
you can help people to be the hero in their own story, well, that builds our credibility. And that helps them, that endears them to their alumni association, because the alumni association helped them to stage their story within their own community. And so that's just one example. And there's so many different campaigns, if you will, that we've done. And I could go on and on about that, but where we're bringing an emotional component, because Simon Sinek talks about the limbic part of the brain, right? This is where nostalgia, loyalty, belonging, belief, all of those happen in the limbic part of the brain as opposed to the neocortex, which is the transactional part of the brain. We want to tap in to the why. The why is the limbic part of the brain. And Simon's a biologist. He's not a marketer. But if you know your biology, you're a great marketer, because it's about human behavior. So the more we can tap in to the emotional side of the brain, that's when we get a response. And that's what storytelling is very effective at doing.
So much good advice. This is perfect, Curt. And I'm struck by many ideas, chief among them, of course, of your effectiveness. Thinking of those grandparents, you're creating fantastic ambassadors. I forgot how you said it, working from the outside in or inside out. But
Yeah.
What a wonderful way to tell your stories, get other people to tell it, who bring an authenticity based on their journey. And from a tactical standpoint, Curt, I guess through all of your communication channels, is in your mind and your team's mindset that like we're going to get a story out once a week or some frequency to kind of make this a year-round effort? Or how do you think about this kind of storytelling on a tactical level?
Well, we can't tell them fast enough, right? And that's one of the discussions I've had. We've got this publication that comes out quarterly.
Right.
And that's kind of the old way of doing it. But the printed story is still very, very valuable for those that read it. But I'm thinking about our younger alumni. How do we tell the stories faster? How do we tell the virtual stories? That's one of the things I'm thinking about is, interviewing some of our alumni. We just finished a Matador Memories project, which was a wonderful project during COVID, in which it was collecting the oral histories of our alumni, giving them the opportunity to just interviewing. And we just collected that in mass, and we have it in a digital vault. And while a lot of those have been published in the book, we were able to collect over 3,000 of these stories in this book. And it's powerful because it's everybody's different memories from different decades of their time here at Texas Tech. Student organizations, their favorite professors, the classes they took, the memories that they had. Just being able to tell that and have somebody listen to them meant a lot to them. We've got those permanently archived. So now the goal is, okay, how can we utilize those?
Right.
How can we take advantage of that to extend the life of those stories? And think about that. As some of these people that participated in that project, when they pass on, their grandkids and great-grandkids are going to be able to listen to their own grandma or their own granddad tell their story about their alma mater in their own voice, long after they've passed on, maybe somebody they never met. So there's value in that. And again, that goes back to what I was telling you about in tradition. It's only as good as how well you tell it and how often you tell it. So we're still looking for ways to be able to do that more effectively. And when I travel, one of the things I love to do with social media is if I can stop at a restaurant in some rural town somewhere run by a Red Raider, I love to go in. Maybe I heard about it. This guy serves great barbecue. I go and introduce myself. Of course, I'm always looking for good barbecue.
Right.
But, what's the story? When did you graduate from tech? What's your memories? What are you doing? How'd you get into this? And I'll share their story on social media, on Facebook. And that tends to really resonate within the following that I have and within our followers with the Alumni Association. Even though they may not know that person, there's a common thread there. And people appreciate their story being told, even down to the most common of levels. And I enjoy that. I think that is one of the most successful things we can do.
Fantastic. And I'm struck by not only how effective you've done that, but every nonprofit leader listening, Curt, has donors, has founders, They have volunteers. Are we asking them to share their story? And then, of course, you've done a beautiful job of repurposing that content across the many channels. But I would say nonprofit leaders in any sector have many stories that they should be seeking. And like you, the value is just exponential.
Some of what I've learned is some of the stories that have been right underneath my nose with some of our board members. I was astonished when I heard them, what they've overcome, what they went through in life, or some issue that they went through, or some turn that they made. Had they not have turned that we wouldn't have even ever encountered each other. Until you have those conversations, you don't know. But I can't tell you how healthy that is to have that deeper appreciation and understanding of the people you work with, whether they're board members, founders, donors, or even alumni that you haven't met. People want to be heard and they want to be understood. And I think the more listening we do, the better off we are. And that's a challenge for me because that's not been my past. I tend to do a lot of talking.
Right. Well,
got to listen to stories. But if your talking can be asking the right questions, the Socratic method, if you will, that gets you to the sweet spot.
Wonderfully put. And yes, a skill we all can improve upon. And as you put it, there's strategic value in listening and asking the right questions. And so, Curt, I'm again grateful for the advice on many fronts. My last question, in fact, you'll be the perfect person to speak to this. Nearly all of our listeners probably attended a university somewhere, graduated, in fact, and maybe aren't utilizing the resources that an alumni association offers. So why should I reconnect with my alumni association, Curt? And maybe in particular, as a nonprofit leader, I bet you could help me as a nonprofit leader, you being someone associated with my alumni association.
Well, the old school answer to that question is because it's the right thing to do.
Right.
And we still try to say that, and it is still the right thing to do, but whether that matters to everybody anymore is a different equation.
Right.
But again, it's about, the whole what's in it for me, or why would I do it, or the quote, quote, value proposition. Well, there's value in belonging. And I would dare say there's a lot of people that don't understand their need to belong to their alumni association. And again, that's up to the university communities to do a better job of advancing that message. I use the word advancing. Strategically.
Good. Right.
But that was just coinkydink. But I think, too, the value of helping them to understand the resources they bring to the university. And I don't mean just through the checkbook or through the Venmo or however. Financial resources are important, but there is so much that people can do, and universities are looking for their alumni to re-engage in their university in a variety of ways. Many schools have established some of these alumni networking platforms. We're experimenting with that right now, but we're looking for new ways in which to engage our alumni, to share the ownership, to help them understand that their relationship with their alma mater isn't just the best 4, 5, 6, 7 years of their life, but that ongoing relationship, Red Raider for life, if you will. So mentoring opportunities, going back and speaking at a business class or speaking at a philosophy class or coming back and sharing their story on campus with the students of today. That's just good. That's just a good practice within any university community to help build the bond among the social aspect of the family in which we all belong to. And I think universities are doing a better job of engaging alumni, but alumni can reach out and offer that proactively, be assertive, reach out to your alumni director and say, hey, I want to be a part. I want to be involved in some way, whether that means being on the board, serving on the board, or being connected with the dean of a particular college to want to give back to the institution. If it means establishing a scholarship, if you have the means to establish a scholarship to continue the tradition of higher education to help pay it forward, giving back some of what you benefited from. That's what we in the alumni profession are all about. I would certainly advocate everybody listening to this broadcast to belong to their alumni association based on whatever structure they have in place. But at the very least, connect, communicate.
Yes.
I guarantee you the offices want to hear from you. They're trying to effectively do it. One of the most frustrating things we run into is like, well, if I'd have known about that, I would have gone. Well, sometimes people don't know about it because we don't have a current address.
Right.
And it's up to the alumni to be assertive and be proactive in making that a two-way communication. So without scolding anybody, if you're not already a member of your association, shame on you. Get involved with your university for the sake of your alma mater and for the sake of this great country.
Great advice, Curt, as you have provided throughout this conversation. And I hope that is a takeaway among many that our listeners will consider. How might you re-engage with your alma mater if you have not done so? Because I bet they would love to hear your story as a nonprofit leader. And there's someone like Curt at that your alma mater office that will put your story to work and connect you with students. And of course, that's good for the nonprofit sector if we connect like you have suggested. But Curt, you've provided literally an all-star library of book references throughout our conversation. So this may be a tough question. Is there one book you might lift up as I ask each guest to maybe make a recommendation for our listeners? Is there one among many that I know you're a fan of that you might lift up now?
Well, let me just, through a common friend of ours and how we got connected, Paige Singletary, my former boss, who actually hired me away from here.
Yes.
Back in the day. But he's the one that really challenged me and got me reading such books. And Stephen Covey's The Eighth Habit was probably my first foray into, understanding the knowledge worker versus the transactional worker. That was what we got into a little bit in The Eighth Habit. And, obviously on the heels of The Seventh Habit. I read The Eighth Habit before I went back and read The Seventh. So
wow,
that was, but Stephen Covey, was probably one of those first impressions on me. And then I veered into a lot of John Maxwell's work, and he's got a ton of them out there, but just a big fan of John Maxwell, obviously. And personally a fan of C.S. Lewis. I like C.S. Lewis a lot. Very provocative, helps me to think. C.S. Lewis doodles. I really love that. So that would be something I would encourage people to look at just on another frame, because I think so much of his teaching is not only historic and prophetic, but so relevant even in the business world. But Guy Kawasaki, there's a lot of names I can mention.
Curt, we're going to squeeze as many of these recommendations into your show notes as we can fit, because you literally could give someone a reading list library, which is fantastic. And in fact, this episode, I hope, will connect many people, not just in the Red Raider community, back to you, but in any community, because you've had great advice. Where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing through Texas Tech?
Well, I appreciate this, Pat, and I hope this was helpful. Yeah, if there's any Red Raiders out there, you're one of us. That's our hashtag. You're one of us, and would love to have you involved if you're not already. But our alumni, TexasTechAlumni.org. We have an app. You can download the app. I'm available. You can find me on LinkedIn and Facebook. Those are really the two platforms that I'm the most active in. Do a little bit of Instagram. Still learning that, but
right.
But connect with me on LinkedIn. Let's get linked. Friend me on Facebook. do a lot of storytelling on that. And I follow a lot of people, follow a lot of other friends that do a lot of these kind of strategies that I think are effective, that helps develop strong followings. But again, to communicate the message. But in my email, curt.langford@ttu.edu. If anybody wants to email me directly, I'd love to correspond. But appreciate all the listeners and appreciate what you're doing for the profession.
Curt, it's been my pleasure. Really enjoyed the conversation. Lots of great takeaways for our listening audience. And thank you again for joining me on the path.
Thank you, Pat.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Curt as much as I did and came away with some practical ideas that can guide you on your professional journey and maybe help your organization be more effective building a dynamic culture and engaging your most important organizational relationships. Don't forget about the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com. You can find out more about Curt and lots of the great programming that he's doing through the Texas Tech University Alumni Association. As always, please share this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com and you'll see the follow button. That's what it's called now, the follow button. And that'll link you to all of the primary podcast platforms. Don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday. And if you like this episode, click on the episodes button at the top of that same page. And you can scroll through thumbnails of each and every one of our now more than 140 episode conversations. Thanks as always for what you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now. And keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.